welcome to all of our virtual attendees. I am Suzanne Wilson Heckenberg, President of the Intelligence and National Security Alliance and the Intelligence and National Security Foundation. Thank you for joining us for the Future of the IC Workforce videocast series, underwritten by Avantis Federal and co-produced by Clearance Jobs. This three-part program examined how we can reimagine the traditional IC work model and use lessons learned from the pandemic to build and grow a talented and diverse workforce. We kicked off the series in February with former NSA Director Harry Coker Jr. and Avantis Federal CEO Andy Maynor, who discussed the challenges and opportunities remote work affords. Episode 2 featured ADNI and the IC Chief Financial Officer Trey Treadwell and Ken Moy, Acting Assistant Secretary of State for INR, who addressed the workforce issues associated with remote work, specifically recruiting, training, and reskilling. For our final episode of the series, we will discuss the technology angle and how the IC is leveraging remote work technologies and open source research and analysis to advance the mission. Here today are Marie Falkowski, CIA's Chief of Digital Innovation for the Weapons and Counterproliferation Mission Center, and Dr. Ellie Nywood, Vice President of Intelligence and Cross-Cutting Capabilities at MITRE. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our program moderator, Lindy Kaiser, who is a Senior Editor of ClearanceJobs.com, the largest career site for professionals with an active secret security clearance. Over to you, Lindy.
Well, thank you again so much to Suzanne, and thank you to the Intelligence and National Security Foundation. Thank you to Avantis Federal for sponsoring this conversation. We're so excited to be talking about the third part in our Future of the Remote Work series. And today we really get a chance to unpack the technology that's enabling this to happen. So without any further introduction, I want to just go ahead and launch into our questions. And Marie, I'm going to ask you the first question here, just about what are some of the most compelling opportunities you see for technology to enable virtual work in the intelligence community? Obviously very applicable for you working for the CIA in your role, and as we see from your backdrop, embracing kind of the remote work situation, at least in some capacity.
Yes, this is my highly curated, shelf behind me. But yeah, well, it's interesting because COVID really forced us to find ways to work differently while also considering options for the future of our work. And I'm a huge, huge proponent of taking advantage of where talent at where it sits. So in my opinion, not everyone needs to have a clearance, right, to do great work for the IC, and particularly those who are writing code, labeling data, delivering technologies. And we were seeing those opportunities pre-COVID, pre-pandemic, but doing that, engaging with the private industry and the commercial sector. But in some of these cases, we were able to take more advantage of that during the pandemic time. So I love it. I think, again, take advantage of talent where it sits. I don't care if you're working from Austin or Pittsburgh or Santa Cruz, as long as you can deliver what we need the way we need it. I think that's great. I also think that research and training are obvious areas where virtual work is very possible. But I did have one example that I thought was just really compelling. Many of you may have heard of the private investigative organization Bellingcat. It's on my Twitter feed, but in the late 2020 timeframe, Bellingcat used publicly available tools and data to accurately identify Russian intelligence officers who were working under alias, employing clandestine tradecraft, and a highly sensitive operation against the Russian government oppositionist, Alexei Navalny. And so what we saw was Bellingcat leveraging its independent international collective of researchers, investigators, citizen journalists, and they used open source data to defeat the tradecraft of what we would consider one of the world's most capable intelligence services. And they were able to identify the individuals who poisoned Navalny based on call records, travel data, and social media behavior. So they didn't do this right behind these government firewalls, and they didn't do it with a team that was co-located in the same office or even the same building. So for me, it just kind of highlights there are different ways for us to be able to do the jobs we do, to get at some of those key intelligence questions. But it also highlights some significant challenges for the workforce.
Mm-hmm. So absolutely. So same question to you, Dr. Eli Nywood, have you on the line with us today. What are some of the most compelling opportunities you see for technology enabling virtual work across the intelligence community?
Yeah, so I'll start from where Marie was. I think to me there's compelling technology, but there are also other compelling things that we can do that enable that virtual and remote work. And I think the sources of unclassified data that are out there and how we do analysis around those, whether it's social media data, whether it's what we call digital exhaust, things you can learn just by scraping the internet for various things, or whether it's commercial sensing data. What can I grab from non-government space satellites looking down at the Earth? There are all these sources of data out there that we can do unclassified analysis with, that you can do at other places, not necessarily in a government building, in a vault. And so I think that's an incredible opportunity that we have to jump on. I think there are technologies that are coming along. How do we make when you work from home, whether it's a zero trust architecture and those principles, how do you make that more secure? So even though you're not in a government facility, you're in a classified facility, firewalled off, we can still have confidence that no one's sort of watching what you do, every step you take as you do that. So I think there's technologies there as well. During COVID, the Air Force accelerated their, secure view device one, letting people get on SIPRNet from home. Maybe that's not quite the right level that we need, for the IC, but I think that kind of technology, how can we pursue things like that? And what can you allow people to touch, from their home or from a remote work location, right? Maybe they're not going into the government, but they're working somewhere else that we have some control over. So I think it's a mix of, things that are out there that you can do, remotely, and then technologies that will allow us to do that even more securely, maybe than we have to date. I think those are great opportunities for the IC to leverage.
Mm-hmm. And now I'd love to get some ideas for using more unclassified technology and how it can improve mission effectiveness. I thought that was a great example that you gave earlier, Maria, just talking about Bellingcat and how this is being done. It's not a matter of can we do this? We are using unclassified technology to do things, and maybe how has COVID opened up perhaps opportunities or other examples for using unclassified technology and still accomplishing, sensitive missions.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that, because unclassified technology is such a broad term. But I do actually like what was mentioned too about the Air Force leveraging technology, right, to access their SIPR from home. That was very intriguing. But I would suggest things like leveraging artificial intelligence and machine learning. It will be game changing. It's going to help us do everything from automating collection and our reporting processes, as well as making sense of large volumes of data. Because when in our line of business, what we talk about all of the time is, finding that elusive needle in the haystack, and we need to be able to do that in seconds, right? We don't have minutes, we don't have hours, we don't have months. So the use of tools like object and image recognition for what I would call near real-time alerting, neural networks, and machine learning for on-demand language translation and transcription, and even disseminating automated reporting, right? We see that happening in places like with the Washington Post and with Reuters. Being able to leverage technology like that in areas like where we have global coverage issues, and maybe using, for lack of a better term, unmanned sensors. But does it really require our human time and human resources to really get at the judgments that are required? So we have about 100 projects that are ongoing at the agency today, and that's going pretty well.
So work didn't just stop when some of the workforce had to go home for COVID, and kind of we're seeing more examples of how folks can do it. So yeah, maybe you can help school me. I count on MITRE to do this kind of stuff for me, Eli. So unclassified technology. So maybe what are we talking about here with unclassified technology? How are we using that to accomplish missions, and maybe what does that include?
Yeah, so I think there are a host of things that sort of unclassified technology can help us get after that, that mission effectiveness. And again, I think Marie, touched on a couple, but for example, you have one government sensor you can use to, take a picture or find something. It might be exquisite, but an adversary might know, when it might be around, or might be able to fool one thing. If I have 100 different sensors, which are unclassified, which come from the commercial sector, just people, or, whether it's a constellation of planet doves, flying around, it's a lot harder to fool all of them than it might be to fool that exquisite sensor, right? Harder to fool, one exquisite sensor than one coarse one. But, now I don't know when you're looking at me, or I don't know what you're looking at me with, or what modality you're using. I think opportunities for innovation and collaboration, right? The IC and the agencies have great minds in them, but there's a lot of people who aren't there, and a lot of great ideas that don't come from there. And again, I think Marie mentioned this a little bit earlier, but if we can bring some of those people in, expose, some of what, we can't tell them maybe about the detailed problem we're getting after, but we can give them a sense of what the challenges we face in terms of intelligence collection. And get them to help with that innovation, get them to help with experimentation. Let's build a technology unclassified, try it out on unclassified data, or, build up a sandbox that they can try things in, try it there, and then move it up to the high side and use it for real. So I think, we can do a lot more innovation in unclassified space than we can in the classified spaces. That we can try different things. We can just be faster. We can be using the latest and greatest, while we wait for that to get, go through an authority to operate process, or get cleared by security to be on a high side network. We can be trying it out and experimenting with it in whole different ways. So I think there's a lot of opportunities in both of those respects.
Ellie, I
Yes.
can't believe that you went into the whole ANA process. That's
Yeah.
fabulous. I wanted to mention too, a couple of things, if you don't mind. We have OSINT teams across the IC, and they're leveraging some of this commercial technology today. We have folks that can go through, just thousands of hours of video and text to report on things like foreign reaction to US policies. They're using best of breed technology for translation and transcription, working with Amazon and Google and Microsoft. So we have, folks that are analysts that'll use technology, getting recommenders, right? So we have so much information that's available. It helps them read in quickly, but also too, like virtual reality and augmented reality are also key players in this. It's going to give us a lot of new options, everything from, let's say, conducting virtual orientations of foreign locations. You can model the tactics for advanced weapons and technology use cases, and then language training, as well as even enabling wellness and capabilities for officers who are working in high stress environments. So yeah, I think there's a lot that can be done leveraging technology and unclassified capabilities.
Yeah, and I think the IC is doing a really nice job of sort of, I'll say, adopting the unclassified technologies that are out there, and I think that that's definitely one path we need to go on. And I think other things we can do, and I already are doing some of this. We might are doing some of this. I see doing some of this. How do you adapt that technology, for the problems that the IC faces? How do you feed those problems back? So you get those bright minds at Google, at Microsoft, and Amazon, not just thinking about their problem, and then we take that technology and transport it over, but get them thinking about our problems a little bit. It could be things like climate change, right? The government, increasing, priority to climate change. We can do a lot of that work unclassified, right? What is that going to mean for the IC? Can we lay those problems out? And then I think just keeping open mind about, the things you can do differently, right? So again, I'll come back to planet. When you image the whole Earth every day, you can, it's a different type of data maybe than the IC is used to. And so how do you bring those two things together, right? How do you bring the classified data and the unclassified data together? And what would that allow you to do that either one won't enable in and of itself? There's some really exciting things that I think are already going on there, and more that we can do there.
Yeah, I think what you just touched on was key, and I think it kind of ties into our next question. So this kind of stuff was happening before, as you emphasized, Maria. Like we've had OSINT, we were. It's not like it was. We've always had everything the intelligence community does is classified at the absolute highest level. I mean, a lot of it is. A lot is. That's overclassification. That might be another conversation. But we have a lot of stuff that's classified. But there's a lot that's done, or that's done in partnership with the commercial sector. So have you seen, kind of the push of more requirements for people to work remotely in federal offices that are just starting to lift? Did that create maybe more of this synergy between what's going on, what's going on at the high side, what's going on at the unclass side, and how we get those, I don't want to say they work together because that will make a lot of people mad, but how do you have both of those working? I'll start with you, Marie, if you can like, how does
Well,
that happen?
it definitely, like, we definitely had to think about things a lot differently. We had to really take a step back. It's funny that you mentioned overclassification. We just had to take a step back and say, okay, what can we do, and what can we focus on? It did cause us to engage a little bit more with the industry. And I see that very often across the IC, especially with our OSINT partners and being able to test and try different things. But, we had to do everything from going to virtual meetings, doing virtual interviews, training, orientation, including the technology development. I think the biggest thing, right, the best practice that we've gotten out of it is just around communication. So we're a very people-based and personality-based organization. And it really forced us to think about how to be more concise, be more specific, right, about what we needed and who we needed that from, and when, and to be frank, even more kind in the process, right? Because you only have a certain amount of time to get things done, but you have a million meetings to go to, and virtual meetings really helped us get to a lot more meetings throughout the day.
So same thing for you, Eli. Can you maybe touch on that? Like, how do we have these two things, happening, and maybe how did COVID accelerate some of the?
Yeah, so I think, no question, COVID accelerated quite a bit. I mean, I think, look, it was going on, but, we basically shut down a lot of our support to the Intel community for, a week or two, when COVID first started, and no one knew what to do. Some of our contracts, literally prohibit, working from home, or even not any work not in a government space. And so, it definitely forced us to look at those a little bit more carefully. I think it forced the government to look at them a little bit more carefully. And, and we've changed, with the government's help, we've changed many of those. But I think, look, when you have people sort of sitting at home, these are not the kind of people who want to just sit there and watch TV all day. They're thinking about what they can do. They're exploring what's out there. And so, our use of, virtual conferencing, our ability to connect to people, our ability to give them trusted tools. I mean, again, I come back to, we still need them working in cyber resilient environments. And I think we accelerated our ability to do that and to give them, again, to build up the security around what they're doing from home or doing from other locations. So I think that's gotten a lot better. I think, you just look at all the, investigative reporting that got done around COVID, looking at how far everybody commutes every day, articles like that in the New York Times, I think opened people's, eyes to the kinds of things you could do. And so I think there were people who knew that already, but I think the understanding of it has really grown, quite a bit, since COVID started. And so I think all of those areas, I think we've learned a lot of things, right? I mean, you see papers in Nature, you see all of this work that, that people have done that is essentially intelligence work, for other purposes and means. We've been really thinking hard at MITRE about, what it means to almost reinvent, intelligence, given what we've learned during COVID, and given, I think, a different set of priorities coming from the government. I do think, there are needs to, we need to do a lot more than understand the Russian or Chinese military today, right? That isn't going to help you, with solar winds or with pipeline shutdowns. And so I think there's a very different set of problems out there, which also are more amenable in some ways to, open source information, to unclassified technology, approaches. We've been writing a set of papers on what we call intelligence after next, one of which about radical transparency, in how you inform a combatant commander about what's going on in their environment. So I think you're seeing some of this innovation, driven just by the environment has been more extreme over the last year. People respond well to that in many ways. And so I think it's helped us quite a bit. Unfortunate how it played out, but I think let's reap the benefits of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love what you mentioned. There's the cyber resilient environment, and that kind of ties into what I want to talk about next. We can't talk about this without kind of talking about the risks that are involved when you do all of a sudden have, like you said, that 2 weeks span with people who struggle to not work all the time. And so there is that aspect of like, you almost need a new set of which it was important you touched on the training piece of it, which is something you can kind of do in some respects at home. So what were some of the risks that were identified, and maybe what steps have been taken to help mitigate some of those risks? I'll start with you, Marie, on that question, and then
Yeah, this is a good one. So, right, we're in the business of intelligence, and that work is inherently classified. And you couple that with, what Ellie had talked about with kind of the diffuse nature of technology, the risks in the cyber arena, and having to be more transparent, as well as the global availability of the data. And that means that we have to be very, very thoughtful on how we approach our work, how we approach our trade craft, how we approach our jobs. And again, we thought about it differently, but I'm actually very open to ideas, and I'm enjoying listening to Ellie talk about this. So like whatever suggestions you have, I hear some papers were recently written, we'll take those.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of risk. One, I guess, quite honestly, I had thought about it, is the risk that people can't leave work at home, can't leave work at the office when they go home. And so I think there's a risk to people's lifestyle as well, which very honestly, I hadn't thought about much before. I think one, thing, that risk is really, where does it cross the line? When does the questions I'm asking about, with unclassified data, the fact that I'm asking those questions make what I'm doing classified? So I think we need to do more to help people understand where that line is. At what point do the questions or the compilation of data, move across a security boundary, and how do we deal with that? So I think that risk is really there, although I think it's one that is manageable. We touched on the cyber threat. I think that's another key one. I do think, again, people are coming up with ways, again, the whole zero trust approach of, not just relying on a firewall, but, encrypting, end to end, and checking, at every point that you can. So I think we can get better from a cyber resilience perspective, and that will help. I think the other risk is, look, the same things that we would like to do with unclassified data, they can be doing too, right? And what is it that we're exposing? And so I do think the better we get at using unclassified sources and doing things from home, let's apply what we've learned in the other direction and red team ourselves, to understand what we are exposing. And again, I think there's definitely a risk there. Let's be conscious of it and do what we can to mitigate it. And then I think, look, I think what we always need to do is, what's the risk reward, right? If the risk is great and the reward is minimal, we should know that, right? If there is a risk, but the reward goes well beyond that, then let's move forward, right? And accept that risk, do what we can to bring it down. I think, we cannot ignore, these masses of data that are out there. We need to figure out, more automated ways to process them, as Marie was talking about. We need to leverage, when Google develops, better, machine vision algorithms on, databases of billions of cats and dogs, right? We need to use that and then transfer it over to look at targets we care about. At some point in that process, it should move into a classified environment. What is that point, and how do we put that in a place that allows us to get the best of it without undue risk? I think that's what we need to keep asking ourselves.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. I love, red team ourselves. What can we learn from this? What are the commercial or non-government maybe success stories within COVID that we can look at, best practices, technology? So I want to ask you that first. Eli, touch on, do you have examples? I know Miter's in the business of research, and so from your research side of the house, what have you discovered, or what are some examples that you're hoping that maybe the IC can apply?
Yeah, so I think definitely. I think again, I think some of the things we've learned from research is how to do that sort of transfer learning, right? How to take, not start from scratch. We're not going to get databases of millions of images of some of the targets the IC cares about. But how can you start, with databases that are out there, and then transfer that, to do what, image recognition of the things you care about? How can you use, simulated targets effectively and not fool yourself that you're doing better than you really are, right? So, I think there's research in those areas. I think there's research in, as I mentioned earlier, how do you use some of these data sources in different ways, right? So how do I do, change detection, when you have, the same images multiple times of day, over and over again, what can you learn about the infrastructure in a country? How can you map all that out, much more quickly than, human analysts can? So, I think those are both examples. I think, again, we have research going on, or, I'll say internal projects we're bringing back to the government around how can you map trends in technology, on the unclassified side, bringing the real SMEs to bear in ways that we've struggled to on the classified side, right? Because, we and the IC and all of us together can't track every technology that's out there at the depth that, the academic community as a whole does. And so I think we've been able to, bring some of those resources to bear in ways otherwise we might not have been.
So same to you, Marie. Can you kind of touch on, are there things that even the IC has maybe seen from what's gone on commercial side or non-government side? I know that's a really tough question for something the CIA to answer, but hey, you never know.
It's a really tough question. Yeah. Well, I think, as we're talking about this, and the more that we're thinking about this, even in the intelligence community, is, there's just so much data that is out there for us to go through. And especially when we're looking at things that are out there, the technologies and the data, the information that's just publicly available, which we call open source intelligence or OSINT, I really feel like those individuals are on the front lines, right? It is the fastest growing commodity that drives whole economies. It disrupts markets like goods, services, transportation, medical, health, politics, shaping public opinion. And there's so much of that data is out in the public domain, and there's just no way for us to bring all of that in to kind of the different security fabrics, and really no need. So thinking about how to do those things in a secure way without having to bring, again, everything behind the firewalls. And so when I think about that, I think about, just how much data is out there. So if you consider companies like Google and Amazon, Microsoft, Facebook, just those alone, those big boys, that's like, I think I read an estimate somewhere, 1,200 petabytes among them. This doesn't get at the data that's coming from places like Dropbox, GitHub, where you'll see a lot of, research papers for interesting technologies, or the massive holdings that are in academia or some of the other industries. So I think about that. And then you think about what can happen in an internet minute, which is something we learned a lot about during COVID times. So if you think about the internet minute and how our lives have changed working through the pandemic, and everything got moved online, your work, education, the economy, entertainment, like those are just a few things that we all had to experience online for the past year. And so according to some data by Visual Capitalist, it's a single internet minute has about 400,000 hours of video streamed on Netflix, 500 hours of video uploaded on YouTube, 42 million messages that are out there on WhatsApp. And in that same minute, 6,500 Amazon packages, I was a recipient of many of those, as well as an incredible over 200,000 participants in Zoom meetings just like this. So when you think about that internet minute and how much data is out there, well, these are all sources of intelligence or potential intelligence that we can use across the IC. So you can find things like how to establish patterns of life, for habits for individuals or even groups, right? Whole regions. It's great for indications and warnings, a good indicator of hostile events or some sort of imminent activity. So, but I also want to point out, just as Ellie had said, that this same data and the tools that we are finding have great intelligence value, so do our foreign adversaries. And it puts our own people, our own activities, our own tradecraft, and even our own national security at risk. So these are things that we have been definitely thinking about at the agency.
I need to figure out how to, make my internet minute last a couple hours, and then I could catch up on my Netflix backlog,
Oh my
right?
God,
I never have enough time.
yeah, for me,
Yeah.
I thought, okay, the internet minute, it's kind of like football time, right? Where 15 minutes is really 30 minutes, right? Depending on where you are. But it's just astounding how much information is going across the internet and is just out there for people to go through.
Yeah, one of the things we've been looking at and been doing is, we talk about getting from data to attributes, right? Because, we can't push all that data up to the high side. Much of
Right.
it we don't need, right? But can we process it, at the point where it's collected, down into some critical attributes? We push those attributes up to the high side and then use those to get after questions that we want. And so that allows us to separate what we do on the unclassified side from what we do on the classified side, because it's sort of automated processing on the unclassified side. So it's not revealing what we're interested in specifically. And then we bring the specific questions to bear on, essentially that process data. And I think that's one way to sort of to bridge that boundary. I think the other thing is, and again, I think Marie touches it. Look, a lot of the things we want to learn about are only available on the unclassified side, right? If someone's mounting an influence campaign against us, the influence is happening in the unclassified world. That is where we have to go to see it. And so how do we do that? But then again, protect the things we need to protect at the same time.
That's fantastic. I can just sit back here, and just let you guys go back and forth. So I love the dialogue and the exchange. And Ellie, it took me 30 minutes to realize I've been pronouncing your name wrong the whole time. I should have. This is what you get for allowing me to not have to refer to you as Dr. Nywood for the whole call. So I apologize profusely for that.
Oh goodness. Did I say it right? Ellie, am I getting it right?
I certainly answered it both.
It took Marie schooling me 2 times for me to be like,
okay.
Gosh, go back into the recesses of my blonde brain and remember what he had told me. Dr. Nywood. But this relates to a little bit to the next question about technology and its people and process as well. So you always have, because we talk about that, I mean, all the time we're talking about security risks. You can have all of the right policies and protocols in place. You can have, the device one or the most secure technology, but your technology is only as good as the end user who is using it, who is unable to remember how to pronounce somebody's name. So maybe, we'll let Marie start with this one, but talk about, as you're identifying these problems, how much of it is technology and how much it is people and process, and then also policy we have to layer on top of that too, because we find that out a ton with COVID. You might be able to do something virtually, but we even have that with the security clearance process. You have to have an in-person signature for some forms. So they're saying like, well, why can't we do it via Zoom? Well, you would have to make a policy change for that to happen. So there might be technology to enable it, but you also have to have policy change. So kind of talk about another broad question for you. Basically tell me whatever you want, Marie, but the intersection of all of those things together.
No, like you said, and in my experience, technology, it's not technology that's the issue, right? It's just like you say, it's the people, the process, the culture, right? The culture. And our culture is rightfully focused on security. So the questions about how we continue to evolve those processes, both on the physical and the online security, how we might have to retool our policies, and how we can bring technologies in a way that is secure, but also do that in a rapid fashion. Like those are all things that we have been talking about and thinking through. It's really about how much risk, right? An acceptable level of risk that we're willing to assume. We're a very risk-oriented organization, but we do really want to make sure that we're protecting our people and our tradecraft.
Yeah, I mean, I think, they clearly need to go hand in hand, right? I mean, again, we didn't know it was a problem having contracts that said you had to work in the government space until, this happened, right? And so I think that's, we fixed much of that problem, right? I think, as we look at, open source data and we look at using some of these technologies, we'll see where the process keeps us from doing what we want to do. And then I think, well, we just need to have a culture that's agile enough to address that, right? And so I think, we need the people to shift and the mindset to shift. We need the process to shift. We need to grow technology. Each will push the other. I think, as Marie mentioned, the culture piece, I think what we really need to get to is, we can't ever treat lightly the risks we are asked the people to take. I mean, that, these are incredibly serious risks for the country, for the people. I think we need to think again, though, about that risk reward piece is, sometimes we're so cautious. I think we put people at jeopardy, or we put the country in jeopardy, right? And so in some ways we need to move fast. I think that's the big cultural shift I'd like to see, is never to, take the risk less seriously. We cannot do that, but be conscious of the risk we take by giving up opportunities. I think that, I think we need a little bit of a shift there from what I've seen in the past. I think that would help everyone.
Well, it's like you never get to zero risk. I mean, I think we all within the intelligence community, especially, we always want to have that zero risk environment, but it just does not exist. I mean, you can't create, I don't know, maybe the CIA has it or you might have a white paper that tells me how to do it, but you still have people like me that are there to create.
I think we have everything, right? It's a range, right? We have folks that are just like, open the floodgates, right? Blend in. And then we have a whole nother group of people like, where are the carrier pigeons? What's Pony Express again, right? So it's just, and everything in between. Right. So it's a very robust conversation.
Yeah, I think that red-blue approach really helps, right? Because, if we are trying to keep an adversary from doing some of these things to us, and we are applying, techniques together, and we're seeing how we can, detect things that they might be doing in open source or learn from that, I think it really helps us. If we put our best minds on the protect side to work there, I think that helps us a lot understand what does and doesn't. It's not completely symmetric. There are things they can do we wouldn't do. But I think it really helps us understand what the risks and the benefits are. It helps us find the holes, when we bring those two sides of the IC together, right? I mean, the IC includes Department of Justice and others, right? What are they doing? What have they learned? What can't they do? What does that mean for what we try to do on the, on the CIA side or on the getting after the adversary side?
So the whole arc of this conversation with the Intelligence and National Security Foundation is about the future of remote work, and that also applies to the future workforce. So the people that we need within the intelligence community who aren't even there yet. So maybe how does some of this technology, the virtual technology environment, make it easier to hire and retain and get people into the IC? I'll start with you on that, Marie.
Oh, well, let's see. So I think it's, it's definitely going to play a big factor. It was playing a factor during the pandemic, and there are a lot of practices that we have kind of put in place that I think will remain, and we'll probably build on those. So during COVID, right, we were conducting virtual interviews. We can leverage some of that technology to facilitate more collaboration and data sharing internally, so we can talk about the potential hires for and ensure that the engagements that we're having with these individuals is just more robust and more interesting at the front end of the hiring process. I can just remember when I applied many years ago, right? When most communication kind of went dark, right? You put in your application, and then you just didn't hear anything for a long time. And it could take a long time to get that conditional offer of employment. Virtual technology will be able to support and enhance that communication with the potential hires that we already have in the pipeline. So it doesn't have to be dark the entire time, and we can give a little more information and feedback during the process. I would say, I also think that gamifying, right, some of the processes, making the hiring process, and as well as the retention of these individuals that are coming in, can make things a little bit more interesting. It can give managers and other participants an opportunity to see how a person engages in different environments, also like how they make go through problems, make decisions, right? Their reasoning, and then with the technical talent, again, I just don't think that it's 100% necessary to bring everybody in right behind the firewall all the time. So wherever we can leverage those virtual capabilities, I think that we will continue to build on that, what we've done over the pandemic, but there's just a lot of opportunity that we can take advantage of at this point.
We talk sometimes about, looking for purple unicorns, right? I want to
Yeah.
find an artificial intelligence expert who is a US citizen, who lives in the National Capital Region, who already has a clearance from Marie's organization to do my work.
Good luck.
And, they exist, but they're really hard to find. And a lot
They're
of
on clearancejobs.com. No,
a lot of other people are looking for them too, right? So we need to grow that workforce, right? And I think we grow that workforce by having, challenging problems that they can start with on the unclassified side, where they can build the technology on the unclassified. We can tell them what they're working on. And then over time, we get them cleared and, we get them exposed to sponsors and we have them understand the IC more. But, we need to grow that workforce. We need to tap into a more diverse set of people as we do that, right? Because, again, we're trying to understand what our adversaries are going to do. They don't all look like us. They don't all think like us, right? And so I think we need that diversity. How are we going to build that? Again, I think it's through having work that people can do in different ways, through being able to expose these problems and get them excited about the technology. The really good people don't want to work on 20-year-old technology, right? They want to be in, starting with the best technology today and then inventing what comes next. And to some extent, they want to tell people what they've done, right? With that. And so again, I think the more we can do there, maybe they can't tell them about how it got used, but they can tell them about a piece of it that they invented. So I think it will be greatly beneficial from a workforce perspective, the more we can do there. And look, maybe not everyone needs to be in the Boston area or in the National Capital Region to do this, or, have a 2-hour commute, back and forth, because that's the only place they could afford to live. So, even if they do that 2-hour commute twice a week, they work in the vault twice a week, and the other days they're doing development at home based on what they learned, while they were there, in a classified facility. I think there's huge opportunity here that we really need to jump on. And we are. I mean, we're trying, the government's trying to do that, I believe.
I think that's great. And those are my main questions. I did want to touch on a little bit because I kind of forgot to ask you about your background and what got you excited and involved in this. I think it's actually a decent way for us to wrap up as well. So kind of talk about, when you're thinking like this workforce development, what got you involved, kind of passionate about working within the intelligence community and within the technology space? What's keeping you excited through a career? And, what are you excited most about to continue the IC technology journey? Start with you, Marie.
Well, so it's been a journey. It's been a 30-year journey. So welcome all who are interested. But I come from a long line of people who have served the country through military and other services as far back as the American Revolution. So we've had everybody from enlisted to officers, scouts, and spies, those who have enabled supply lines, as well as worked in state and federal service. So I'm also an Air Force brat. So no surprise, like when I turned 19, that I would join the Air Force and become an intelligence specialist. So they told me it was going to be something like a news reporter with classified information. I didn't know what classified information was, but it just seemed like it could be a lot of fun. And it has been. I would say the technology piece of this has been much more evolutionary. So I am a person who failed typing class in school. We were still typing on typewriters. And then we started getting introduced with the computers, and I didn't do so well. I quit that class too, because they made it feel like a typing class. So, trying to kind of bend the way we view technology now, and how actually we were even using it at that point, because I'm an Atari generation kid, right? So I grew up playing video games at the same time, mostly at the arcade. And then we would use that as opportunities to make friends and solve problems. And just, it really gave me a different view of the world. So if I couple that with my Air Force experience, that really changed at least my concept of what a computer was. So when I first came into the military, if we were going to go pick up intelligence message traffic, right, I had to get a locked computer, grab a floppy disk, lock it up, walk from the office to the comm center, have the guys wait around, have the guys download the messages on the floppy disk, lock that back up, walk back to the office, upload that into this giant, thing, and then kind of go through the messages using some sort of DOS commands to read those. So the first time that I saw something different was in the early 90s. It was Microsoft, and you got to see something that was user friendly, it was elegant, it was just a whole different way to do things, and we could go through thousands of messages in a day. I think the most I could do was about 2,000 in a day, but I didn't have to walk places and do things. So that was interesting. I started to see things a little bit differently. So like the Air Force helped me think about technology differently. They also just as an organization kind of put new technology in front of you all of the time. So I just became very comfortable at adopting and incorporating technology into kind of my daily workflow. And when I eventually arrived at the agency, if there is a singular incident, right, where I decided that I wasn't just going to be an intelligence professional, but I was going to become more of a technophile and get involved in technology management, I would say it was a late Friday afternoon, as most things happen. I got a phone call from the White House and asking us to get involved, right, in operation. This was say sometime a couple of years after the events of the Arab Spring. We were seeing ISIS kind of taking over in the area, in the Syrian area. Syria was also going through its own civil war. And what we were being asked to do was to find some American hostages that were in the region. And so we worked really hard. We were not successful. And that really, really just broke my heart. We're in a place, right, where we are saying that we can, leverage technology and go through all of this data, and we can find that needle in the haystack. And we worked really hard, but what I found is that we were also employing a lot of brute force manual tactics and spending a lot of time having to kind of move across the different security fabrics and different databases and different capabilities. So I just decided then, right, that I was going to get really involved in technology and that I was going to do everything that I could to try to make sure that I bring the best capabilities to the officers. And that's kind of set my career path where I've just been more involved in technology management overall.
Wow, I'm glad I got to that question. I'm just like, this is what the intelligence community is about. Like, it's technology, but there's always a human element behind it.
And we are real people at the CIA, I promise you. Yeah.
And incredibly, powerful and yeah, the thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Try to follow that,
Yeah,
Ellie.
no, I don't think I could follow that. And it's interesting. I think my evolution has been almost the opposite of Marie's, right? Because I started from a technology perspective, right? I mean, I was in love with technology and airplanes and space and rockets. In graduate school, I studied magnetoplasma dynamic thrusters for spacecraft, right? Which my guess is you've never heard of. And at some point in graduate school, I realized that while I was probably one of the 5 world's experts in magnetoplasma dynamic thrusters, there were only about 5 people in the world who cared, right? And it didn't really matter. And, realized I wanted to do something that would have real impact, and would matter. And, my family does not go as far back as Marie's, in this country, but I think in part because of that, incredibly appreciative of the opportunities, that this country has given us and what the freedoms, that we are all working for and this way of life really mean. And so, to me, this is a high calling, right? To be able to have impact, on what we're trying to do is, what motivates me, to get after this, dedication to that mission, right? I mean, MITRE, we have a motto, solving problems for a safer world, right? And I love both parts of that, right? It matters that we're working for the good of our country and through the country for the good of the world. And I love that I get to solve problems to do that, right? Because that is what keeps me intellectually interested. and being able to bring both of those together, right? Do the kind of work I love to do, to have the impact I I want to have for important things. I mean, that's incredibly motivating. And I'm learning new things all the time. I'm learning in this call, and I love that. So,
Ellie, I need you to say that again. You're a what?
Magneto.
Plasma.
Dynamic.
Dynamic. It's like
Thruster.
ectomorphic.
We're all like typing as trying to
Wow.
figure out, like, okay, we want to know more. Read his bio. I don't read bios on these webinars, but these people are incredibly interesting. Intelligence, INSA never has anybody who's not an expert and hugely successful and intelligent on these talks. And so thank you guys so much for your time. I love the way that ended, because like, this is why we all do this, because it's about people, and it's solving problems. And Captain America couldn't do this stuff. It's amazing the work that you're doing, the way you're leveraging technology, but the way you're keeping people at the center of it. I think those are great takeaways. And this is the last. I'm kind of sad. Nicholas Damianos, who needs a shout out because he came up with all of these questions. I'm Barbara Walters. I just butcher the questions and mispronounce people's names. Nicholas came up with these questions. This is our third part of this series, and it's really talking about the future of the workforce in the intelligence community. So we wrapped it up with technology, but it's been a great series. So we hope the folks who are joining us will continue, will listen in on the rest of those, will be a part of the conversation. This is really an area where all of these organizations, the CIA, MITRE, Avantis Federal, who's underwriting this, and also INSF, the Intelligence and National Security Foundation, has just a real vested interest in doing this, launched a scholarship that is a part of this conversation, targeted money going to attracting diversity candidates into the intelligence community workforce, because we know we need the brightest and the best. And there is interest there, because people hear you guys and they're like, got clearance jobs. I'm done. Who wants to hire me? I'm ready to work for the CIA. But this is like exciting stuff and amazing work that you're doing. So I'm just really grateful to INSF, to you all for being a part of this conversation, and to the folks again at the Intelligence National Security Alliance, like Nicholas, who helped put this program together. So I really appreciate your time, and thank you again for joining us.